Hello and welcome to another episode of Mask or Peace Theater. I am your host, Professor James Pretentious. Today we are going to be looking at faith, love, and mitigation. Not litigation, mitigation. Can the three coexist? Can we help mitigate the spread of COVID while loving our brothers? And how does faith play into it all? Can we reconcile these three items? Join us as the medical team divulges their insight into this topic.
So if I could restate this last question, the question really is, how do we as Christians balance our faith in the Lord and our commitment to making wise choices? Because we heard from some folks who basically said, if I believe in Jesus, why would I bother to do this thing? And then we had other people who said, if we are faithful in Christ, shouldn't we be doing this same thing in order to prevent, transmission and all of that? And it's kind of like this tension. People seem to think that there is tension between their faith and the response that they make.
While I may be a control freak and try to determine my own outcomes of situations, the truth is I've lost that battle enough times that I know full well I am not the one in control. I have mitigation strategies. I have things I like to do because they make me feel good.
Sure.
But I have to remind I don't even have to remind myself anymore. It's blatantly obvious that I am absolutely not the one in control.
Yeah.
And when you help families realize that, when you help patients realize that, and where is your control? Where does your faith lie? And you can point them to the fact that God is sovereign. God is unchanging.
Yeah.
And ultimately, He's the one in control. And you can refuse that, and you can deny it as long as you want, and that's fine with me. That's okay. But ultimately, you will come to the conclusion that you don't have control over this. We can mitigate our world. We can influence our world. We can we can put measures in place and routines in place to try to determine the outcome of a situation, i.e. whether or not you get COVID, or whether or not you die from COVID, or something like that. But ultimately, and this is how I reconcile it in terms of faith, I use PPE measures. Not because my trust and faith is in the PPE measure. Those are mitigation strategies. My faith and trust is in God. And that's why I am willing to take the vaccine without hesitation. I'm willing to take the, go to work and work in this environment and deal with these disease processes without hesitation and without fear.
Yeah.
Because I know who has control.
I was thinking one of the ways Christians were defined in the Dark Ages was their willingness to go in during the plague pandemic, actually, and care for the sick and the dying, for putting themselves at risk, being selfless in that way. There's a lot of analogies there. There's a lot of similarities there. I think one of the ways that we as Christians in modern times, one of the ways I think we should approach this is, how do we care for those around us? How do we love those around us? And that looks like a lot of different things. But ironically enough, I think one of the barriers that we have right now in order to love people is almost the barriers that we're not willing to put in front of our faces for some people. And the irony is there. But I think even if you don't believe that works, so I have a story from high school, and this makes sense in my mind. I don't know if it makes sense in yours, but we were part of a conference. I was a 90s kid. We had Dare to Share, and that was a conference where you went and learned how to share the gospel, and then you went out and put it into practice. And so I'm in Denver at night. I'm with me and a couple other guys. One of them was about my height, my build. And so there's three guys at night. walking around, walking up to strangers and saying, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And so we approached this older lady at a gas station at night. She's just trying to fill up her car. And I don't even remember if it was me or somebody else. We walk and say, hey, can we talk to you for a second? And she was terrified. She's like, get away, I'm gonna call the police, get away. And she was absolutely terrified. Our intentions were good. Our will was good. We wanted to share the gospel. We wanted to save this lady's life. And that was our method. That was our intention. That's not the way she saw it. And I think, in my mind, that's important in the way we present ourselves now. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that the masks are the end-all, be-all. In fact, I'm not saying that at all. Mm-hmm. But if we go around and pretend like the coronavirus isn't happening, I'm not even saying that, pretend's not a good word. If we go around and we don't present ourselves in a way that is showing that we love each other, we're putting up barriers to take that barrier down. That is one possible way to see this, is that we need to show that we love them by showing that we're taking care of what we know works. We're washing our hands, and we don't necessarily need to show that we need to do that. But unfortunately, one of the most visible ways we do that nowadays is wearing a mask. I'm not saying everybody needs to go wear a mask all the time, but I think this is just another approach that we need to take to this, is that we can sometimes show people we love them by taking some of these steps and some of these measures. And so that's one of the ways I see a practical thing that in certain situations may be a way we show Christ's love to them, so that we can have that relationship with them.
So it seems to me that when we get into that area, that's when a lot of people's, like, the differences of opinion become, they can often become unpleasant.
And if I could add one more thing to what I was saying previously, I would also be willing to take my mask off if I knew that's causing fear, or if that's creating a barrier between me and talking to somebody else. I mean, be all things to be all people. I know I'm not at high risk. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to do that. And so I think it's, again, there's this tension, there's this relationship between people, and our call is to bring Christ's light to this world.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do whatever it takes to do that.
Yeah.
And that looks different in different situations. So I don't want to make a blanket statement one way or the other.
Right.
But I think a lot of times, a lot of people I've interacted with, we tend to fall more on one side of the spectrum than the other. And so I want to encourage, more than anything, more than any specific action, is that we are Christ people first.
Yeah.
And
we're not people's eyes.
Well, we're not a kingdom of Republicans. We're not a kingdom of Democrats. We're a kingdom of Christ, and we need to do what God calls us to do to minister to His people that He's put in our lives.
So, one thing as we close, one thing that you said that I really like, you use the word kingdom several times, and I think I like that word too. And one of the challenges that we have as American Christians, you had mentioned before that the American diet is not the best, and so the other thing is that the American approach to public discourse is also not the best.
Polarization.
Yeah.
Polarization.
And,
to see it through someone else's eyes.
Yeah, and that's
drop
critical.
Your arrogance.
Yeah, and to say I want to know, I want to understand, and oftentimes it takes a personal story to do that. For me, the moment, because as we started this whole process, I'm kind of like, I believe in personal liberty and all that, but then on the other hand, I'm like, but I want everybody to do this one, to wear masks and to do this for this, and what happened was I was confronted by two different responses, both of which tempered my conviction that there's absolutely one answer that we should all be taking. And one of those was discovering how many people, even just within our own congregation, are struggling with anxiety and depression right now. And as I started to engage those things, I started to realize there's a lot of fear that some people are struggling with, and I've heard Christians kind of dismiss that and just kind of say, well, they shouldn't be afraid because we've not been set free in order to just become slaves of fear again, which is true. But the reality is that there's a great number of folks that we interact with on a daily basis who the right way to help them not be afraid is not to shove their fear in their face, but instead to listen and understand. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I've had a number of folks that I've realized have become anxious and depressed because of the separation that they're feeling from other people. And so figuring out, there are times when you'll see me put on a mask, and that I try to make sure that I'm putting on a mask because I love others. And there are times you'll see me take a mask off, and I'm trying to make sure that the same reasoning applies. And I'm imperfect at it, and there are times I act out of selfishness like anybody else. But the calling is to be like our King. And our King was not afraid to pick up a cross and walk that hill up to his own death. Jessica, do you see any contradiction between your faith in Christ and taking protective measures as a medical professional?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess the example I would say is, you know, when I was in PA school, I had to work in an active TB and AIDS ward in Africa, and I had to operate on AIDS patients without protective gear. They didn't have it available, and I was not thrilled about that, but I just prayed and asked the Lord to put a mask over my face, and I had to accept God doesn't always answer that prayer. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get AIDS or TB. And then fast forward 10 years to entering the COVID unit, and I still prayed and said, Lord, put a mask over my face. And I think for me, it's, you know, it says in Timothy, it says, God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So, you know, when you know you have the equipment available, it's kind of dumb not to wear it, you know, if you're in swarming COVID unit.
It's bad stewardship. If you take
Yeah.
yourself out of the game because you don't use the resources that God has provided for you,
Right.
you're not able to be his hands, you're not able to be his voice, you're not able to hold the phone, the iPad so that people
Right.
can communicate and pray with each other on their deathbed when there's no one else to do it. If you take yourself out of the game through poor stewardship of the resources God's put before you, that's foolish.
So,
It's
but
foolish.
So at the same time, I would say there's also the reality that there will be times when we're called to walk into danger without the right equipment. Whether it's like you said in Africa in an AIDS ward, or if the Lord calls one of us to walk into a neighborhood that is not safe in order to take the gospel with us. Sometimes we are called to do things in spite of the danger. But those things don't have to be at odds, right? And I think that the key piece here is Jesus never asks us to check our brain at the door. He never asks us to say, don't seek to understand my world. He says, seek to understand my world within the context of my word. And so as Christians, we should be confident that science is possible because the world was created by the God who is, yeah, exactly. And that means that it's by no means a contradiction to say, I'm going to put a mask on in the right context because I can have faith in Jesus for my salvation and my health, and also have faith that that He is the one who's put me here in this context, in this moment, where I'm called to respond to the world that I'm actually in. So sometimes that feels like a tension for folks, but I don't think it has to. And I think that there's a lot, or not just I think, I know that there is a lot of Christians out there who nobody's ever said to them that the mind of God is what makes science possible in the first place. That the fact that our Creator is infinite in wisdom and ordered the universe according to His plan is the reason that we can be sure that the seasons change according to their time, and you know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow because we have an intelligent creator who ordered it that way. And the same goes for when we discover things, when science is possible because God made the world. And that means that as Christians and as health professionals and as Christian lay people, that we can step into the world we actually live in with confidence. So I encourage everybody, don't be afraid to look at the world that you actually live in and say, God made this. Every square inch is His. There's not a single inch of this universe that's outside His control and His will and His purpose. And also, He has put you here for a very specific reason. And that reason is that His glory would shine through you in the way that you live. So go forth and take His glory with you so that others would look and see and respond and give glory to Him as well. So for the record, I am not a doctor. I am not a medical professional. I do not pretend to have any special knowledge about any of this stuff. I don't want this to ever be like, don't ever let this see the light of the day.